This one's bad. Really bad. So, as of late, we've had a slew of good games that I've been playing, and because of that, my views have been taking a hit, which means that we need to go back to making money. And how do I do that best? Making fun of bad games. No, but on a more serious note, as when it comes with all of these bad game reviews, I didn't search this one out and go, how do I find the worst game possible so that way I can tear it to shreds? No, as usual, this was recommended to me by someone. Here's the DM if you don't believe me. They said, play this. It's a small game that I think came out 2 days ago. It's like Dungeon Quest, a game that I don't think I've played, but it's got far, 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 far better combat. Only issues I found with it was just the camera is actually horrendous sometimes, and that of course because it's a Dungeon Quest type of game, it gets kinda boring. But yeah, I would like you to review it so it gets more recognition and overtakes Dungeon Quest, because Dungeon Quest is horrid. So mark that one up. Next time, I'll be talking about Dungeon Quest to see how much truth this statement has. But when it comes to this video, we're talking about Linestra, the game that was recommended to me by this guy. And this game is horrid. It's really bad. Now granted, not all of Linestra is bad, so credit where credit's due. The first thing that we're going to be talking about is the positives for the game. Starting up the game, and you can tell pretty clearly that the people behind this did care about it at least a little bit. There was a lot of effort put into the environments and the general graphical fidelity of the game. Unfortunately, that passion does not extend into the actual gameplay of the game, but we'll be getting there. When you first boot it up, you'll be put into a tutorial that's pretty extensive. The only real complaint that I think I'd have about the tutorial is that it's a bit hard to understand, seeing as there's just so many systems here. But then again, I don't envy the position of the developers to try to put together a tutorial with so many systems. This is one of those things where they just try to give you as much information as they can and hope that you're going to remember it later on down the line. The tutorial does a serviceable job, and the fact that it's here to begin with probably puts it above a lot of other games, but at the end of the day, a tutorial can only save your game so much. There was also this weird thing where it has you choose your starting weapon, but it actually just ends up giving you all of the weapons anyway. I don't know if this is a good or a bad thing. I guess it depends on who you ask. I feel like if you're gonna ask your players to pick a starting weapon and then you just go, oh yeah, and here's all the other weapons too, it kind of defeats the purpose, but hey, what do I know? Anyways, after you complete the actual tutorial level of the game segues you into the hub and actually continues the tutorial, teaching you all about the different systems to craft, etc. I feel like I've already talked about the tutorial too much, and the reason that I'm talking so much about the tutorial is because, well, that's about all I can say in terms of the good things about the game. It is all downhill from here. So booting into our first actual level of the game, and the first problem that we're going to be running into is the combat, which is the biggest problem about this entire game. And the thing that, for some ungodly reason, the person who recommended this game to me said was far, far, far better than Dungeon Quest. So God, I am not excited to be looking at what the combat is like in Dungeon Quest, because the combat here is ass. It's horrible. This is some of the worst combat when it comes to PvE I've played in a long time. It is just genuinely terrible. But let me try to explain why. The first and most obvious problem here is the visuals. They just wanted to throw a bunch of shit on your screen, I guess, and because of that, while you're fighting the enemy, you can't see shit. Look at this. It's just a red and yellow blur of shit going on my screen. How the hell am I supposed to tell when the enemy's actually going to attack me? Well, that's the funny part. You're not. The game is seemingly supposed to be balanced around the fact that you can parry enemy attacks by pressing F. The problem is, I don't really see how you're supposed to reliably parry enemy attacks when the startups for enemies' attacks are very little, if not non-existent. Never mind the fact that while I'm attacking, I can't see shit. So while you can animation cancel into a parry, which is much appreciated and a great mechanic, it's kind of balanced out by the fact that I can't see shit. How am I supposed to know when to parry? And even if you do parry an enemy attack, the window that you get for an opportunity to attack the enemy back is negligible at best. It basically doesn't exist. So all this bullshit about how your systems work and how you're going to fight the enemy basically just devolves into mashing buttons with your health bar and their health bar, hoping that their health bar goes down faster than your health bar. Wow, fantastic combat. Am I right, random Discord guy? Like, I don't understand. I must be missing something here, but I don't think I am. As for the skills that you have in order to fight against the enemies, these have their own sets of problems. Probably the most notable problem is the same thing that I mentioned in my Devis of Creation video, which is just like in that game, all of the weapons in a certain category have the exact same list of skills. And unlike in that game, where you at least had the small variety of being able to upgrade certain parts of the skills, here, all the skills are unlocked from the get-go, and they all will always do the same thing. Like, there's no variety here. If you pick a staff and then you get a legendary staff, it's the same as your shitty starter staff. It just does more damage. That's not interesting, guys. Don't do that when you're making a game. Not that getting a legendary staff would be very interesting as it is, considering that I crafted one like less than an hour into the game. I couldn't use the damn thing because I didn't see that it had a level requirement. But yeah, I just went and made one. The highest level staff in the crafting menu, and I just made it in less than an hour. What? I've gotten off track. We were talking about combat, which, despite the things that I've been saying, you might be surprised to hear that it gets even worse. Yes, that's right, it gets worse. Because this game has the most incompetent AI in the history of video games. It is fucking useless. And I mean it, completely useless. To put it simply, the AI has some of the shortest AI leash range I've ever seen in a video game. You can walk back like 7 steps, and the enemy just goes, oh, I guess it was the wind, turns around and hightails it back to where it was. Now, I get that games need to have leash ranges in order to make sure that the enemies don't fall into some sort of pit and then get stuck there forever. But here's the thing, the pits in the game are death pits for the NPCs. The only reason I know that is because, hopefully I can find it, there was one time where the AI just gave up on life and walked straight off the cliff. Seriously? Just walked straight off the cliff. So they've got 0 leash range. Sometimes they walk straight off the cliff. Sometimes they just get stuck on barriers and completely unable to pathfind around them. They're just completely fucking useless. And it makes me scratch my head as to why they're so shitty, because this is the whole game. One of the major pillars of your video game is PvE combat, which means fighting against the AI, and the AI is total ass. That makes 80% of your game automatically total ass. How, like, do they test this? No, they don't. And I can prove they don't. I can prove that they do not test this game because the second that I equipped the staff, the ranged weapon in the game that already fell off a cliff, then took a nosedive into the bottom of the fucking Marianas Trench. The AI has 0 way of dealing with ranged weapons. I mean it. Literally 0. In my time playing, I came across a singular enemy type that used any sort of ranged attacks, and it would be very rare that they would even use the ranged attacks outside of close range anyway. This means that every single NPC needs to blindly charge towards you in a straight line. That means you can just pepper it with ranged attacks over and over and over and over again until you get outside of its leash range, and then it just turns around and goes back, and you shoot it a bunch, turns around and goes back, shoot it a bunch. This works on every enemy in the entire game, bar 0. None. Not a single enemy in the whole game can deal with this strategy. Guys, how the fuck do you put this into your game? There's no way, there's no fucking way that you tested the fact that you can just sit outside the leash range and spam projectiles and the AI can't do shit. I do not believe you if you say this game was tested. You are a damn liar if you say this game was tested, because it fucking wasn't. And surely at this point you're like, Eclipse has lost his mind. It can't get worse. It's impossible. There's no way it gets worse. And you're wrong. It gets worse. You're wrong. So in order to complete these levels, what do you think you do? Well, pretty self-explanatory. You get through the level and you kill the boss at the end of it. Okay, well what if I told you that you could just run past every single enemy in the entire dungeon, and then because their leash ranges are so small, after running past them they just forget about you, and then you can leash range cheese the boss in the room with all of the enemies, clearing the dungeon without killing anything but the boss. It's a joke. It's a joke. This whole game is a sick joke. Did you guys test the game? No, you did not test the game. Why the fuck can you walk past every single enemy in the entire base, kill the boss and win? Your guess is as good as mine. I don't have a goddamn clue. At level 14, I decided to go into the final dungeon available in the entirety of the game, which is one of the very few good things I can say about the game. At the very least in this game, there are not level locks, which I guess ended up being a curse on this game rather than a blessing, because I was able to do this to begin with, whereas if there was a level lock, they would have blocked me. So I went into the final dungeon of the game, which recommends like level 40 or 50 at level 14, and I proceeded to run past several of the enemies, sometimes getting stuck on enemies and getting killed. So I guess they did the bare minimum of being able to kill me a few times as I was running past all of these enemies. Eventually, I found an enemy that appeared to have like 80,000 health, and I was like, well, if they have this much health, surely this is the boss. I tried to leash range cheese them, and things started to get dire as it seemed like this one might actually have a halfway decent leash range. Except for it ended up screwing itself over because I ended up lodging myself in between this tree stump, and guess what? The boss has no ranged attacks. So I sat here for the next 11 minutes just spamming all the buttons on my keyboard. And I did it! I win! Final dungeon of the game! Yay! Are you kidding me, guys? Are you serious? You're actually for real right now. You just let me do that. What the fuck? And this is one of those things where, like, I'm just... there's other things that I want to talk about, and I guess I can, but there's no point. Like, there's no point of talking about anything else in the game after talking about just how horrendously terrible the combat of this video game is. I haven't even mentioned the fact that the ranged attacks that you have go through walls. So when there are certain areas of the game where enemies are inside of buildings, I just shot arrows through the wall. Like, they just didn't think. They were like, all right, the game's done. Push it out. I want to make my profit. Speaking of making profits, I guess we could talk about the microtransactions and the other mechanics or mini games in this game. And, well, those are a bit questionable. They're not nearly as bad as this. It doesn't get worse than this. Thankfully, it doesn't get worse, but this is a new low. Basically, when you're exploring dungeons, there are a few mini games that you can partake in order to get more loot. Things like simply just holding E on areas to get some gold, or attacking resource nodes in order to get resources. However, there are two more kind of in-depth mini games, although I hardly even call them that. One, which is this little digging mini game where you just dig squares. Like, does this even classify as a mini game? You literally just click 10 squares. If you click another square, it goes, money please. So you only ever click 10 squares and then you just move on. This is no different than if I just held E. It's holding E with extra steps. I don't know, it boggles my mind. Then there's the actual mini game in the game, which is unlocking locked chests. You need to lockpick all of the chests that you find in the game, which is kind of cool, I guess. It uses a very simplistic lockpicking mini game where you just need to time your button press with when the little indicator is over top of the green area. Now, I think some of the more difficult ones of these are just basically flat out impossible unless you're cheating. The thing moves so incredibly fast, I have no fucking clue how you're supposed to time this. There was one specifically that was impossible. I doubt I'll be able to find it in my footage, but it was absurd. Generally speaking, they're not that hard, and you have 3 attempts to do them, which of course, if you expend all 3 attempts, it'll go, money please. Now this is one of those things that kind of bothers me, because sure, it's cheap, and sure, I'm never gonna hit yes, but every single time you open up a chest, if you fail all 3 times, it will 100% of the time prompt you for money, please. At least with the digging holes minigame, if you don't click on the extra time, it won't go money, please. But here, every fucking time, money, please, please give us money. I get it, guys. It's obnoxious. Stop. Other than that, well, I suppose there's really not much else to say. A lot of the systems in here are very bare bones when it comes to crafting and upgrading your gear, but at the end of the day, who really cares? As I said when I was talking about the combat, none of the stuff in this game matters whatsoever when the base of the game is so fundamentally just flawed and a total complete failure. This is gonna sound kind of off, but there have only been a few times when I've been playing on the Roblox platform where I've gotten to the end of a game's game loop and concluded that it was a complete and total failure in every sense of the word. And this is one of them. Usually, I just have problems with the way that things are executed, or I just don't like the thing that I'm playing to begin with. But here, I can see what they're trying to do, and it's just, like, I have no words. I have no words. You can see it for yourself, and whatever, man. Video's over. Don't play this. Bye.